Hey, this is Gary with Jolly Dolly, and I'm going to show you how to change out the sealed lead acid batteries on a Power Plus chain drive motorized dolly. The first step is to lay the dolly on its belly and remove the rear cover. We have it on a table here, but you can do this just as easily on the ground. Before you take anything apart, the first thing you want to do is remove the fuse. If you open up this cover, your fuse is going to be right here. This is what's called a maxi fuse. Some models may have a standard ATC automotive fuse. If it won't come out, just use some pliers to pull it out. Now, once the fuse is out, you want to take some pictures of the wiring here to make sure you put everything back the way it's supposed to be. It can be confusing because some of these wires go down and come back up. So you may need to cut the zip tie first and make sure all the wires are visible, and then take pictures from multiple angles. We want to loosen and remove all of the battery terminal screws. And this is either going to be 8mm or 10mm. So you need a ratchet and a socket. Make sure to locate and set aside these two wires to be used to put everything back together. Once all the battery wires have been removed, we want to remove the battery tie down. This access hole is how you get to the bolt. Now on this one, all this has shifted over and you can't get to it from the access hole. So what we're going to do is use a wrench to come in here and start to loosen this until it's loose enough where we can push everything back over and access the bolt through the hole. Just start pulling batteries out from the back. And then you'll be able to get better access to complete removing the bolt. You want to take a look at the ring terminals on these two wires, as well as the ring terminals inside the dolly. It's going to be these two, the black and red. You can tell because they have two wires going to them. Just inspect them. If they have any corrosion, you're going to want to use some sandpaper to get them cleaned up so it's nice, clean metal. Also, when doing a battery swap, you should follow these two wires back to their source and just make sure that everything's in good condition. On this particular dolly, this is one of those battery wires. And as you can see, this connector has arced. This whole thing is melted. This needs to be changed out. This is not safe like this at all. With your batteries removed, you want to check your charge port. As you can see, this one's got quite a bit of corrosion on it, and I would recommend replacing it. But the main thing you're looking for is breakage. If the batteries have slammed into this, the solder joint can break and the wires can come loose. So double check this, and also follow your wires to the end and check these ring terminals. This one's got a little bit of the plating scraped off, but it's still in pretty good shape. If there's corrosion or dirt on here, you want to use some sandpaper and clean these up. But if you're at all unsure, I would recommend replacing these charge ports. They're not very expensive, and we sell them pre-crimped. So if you're going to replace your charge port, I'm going to show you how to remove that now. We're going to loosen these screws, but you've got to hold the nut that's back behind them and you can't see. You're going to use needle nose pliers for that. So I'm holding the nut and turning the screw. Some of these are lock nuts, so it'll be difficult to remove the screw. You'll have tension on it the whole way. Again, turning with the screwdriver, but making sure the nut is held in place behind it with needle nose pliers. All right, once you've got them out, pull this out. and just pull out the wire with it. Working from the outside of the dolly, we're going to route the wires for the charge port into the hole, and then we're going to put the charge port in its hole. Being careful, this spring right here often gets caught up, and we'll need to wiggle this around to get it fully seated. Once you do, just make sure this trap door is working properly. Now, you're going to want to use the screws that came with your new charge port. These are 3mm screws, and they go in a lot easier than the number 6 screws that might have been in there before. And these flange nuts, if you can see those, these will lock into place on the back side. So once you get them hand tight, you should be able to hold them with just a finger instead of pliers and tighten them. You want to check your battery tie down and see if it's bent or arced like this severely. You're going to want to try to flatten it out. Before you start installing the new batteries, I recommend you take your battery tie down and the bolt that goes on the top side of the dolly and go ahead and get that started threading in. This bolt is incredibly hard to get to once you have batteries in the way, so if you do this, it'll save you a lot of effort. Now you can pull it up and out of the way and start sliding in batteries. Make sure that these batteries are going directly on the floor here, that there's no wires or extra hardware that's under them. Make sure you're putting negative over here by the side of the dolly, positive is over there by the motor. And then one last check to make sure you don't have any wires pinched. Make sure you have access to all your wires you need to get to. And then you can put in the bottom bolt. Be careful not to cross thread these. Make sure they're threading in good. And then need to be extra careful that these bolts are tightened evenly. Because what happens if you start to pinch on one side, no matter how tight you get the other side, it's going to continue to pinch this battery and leave the other battery loose. So when you're done, all the batteries should be nice and tight, especially the middle battery. If the middle battery is loose, then you probably still have some curvature to the battery tie down, or there may not be enough padding underneath it. Your new battery should come with screws, split lock washers, and flat washers. You want to put the split lock washer on the screw first and then the flat washer. So you should have something that looks like this. And it's important to use these washers because it's what's going to keep these screws tight. All right, we're going to start reinstalling some of these wires, starting with the positive wire. This is should be a large and small gauge wire that are crimped together in a ring terminal. That's going to go on this battery terminal right here, the positive battery terminal, the lowest battery. We're also going to combine this wire. This is the red wire from the charge port. So we're going to go through the charge port wire, through the positive wire to the dolly, into the battery terminal, and we're going to screw that screw in just hand tight for now. All right, now we're going to find the negative wire, which will have a large and small gauge black wire crimped together in a ring terminal. And then we're going to find the black wire coming from the charge port. And we'll go through the charge port wire, through the negative wire, down into the battery terminal. And this is going to be the negative battery terminal of the battery closest to the top of the dolly. And when we're doing this, we need to make sure these wires are moved out of the way so that the screw can go all the way down. All right, so next we're going to locate our jumper wire, which is this wire right here. It's just a red wire with a ring terminal on both ends. This wire is usually routed down here. Just be careful when hooking this up, and I'm going to explain why in just a second. So We're going to connect this to the positive terminal of the middle battery. And then we're going to find the other end. And this is why you need to be careful. If this were to touch this battery here, it would short it out, and we don't want that. So the other end of this wire is going here to the negative terminal on the lowermost battery. I know it's hard to see what I'm doing, but just putting these hand tight for now. The last wire that goes on is the fuse wire. And we started over here on the topmost battery, positive terminal. And then we're going to go hook that to the negative terminal on the middle battery. And I know this can be confusing. There is a wiring diagram. You can also take a picture of the wires before you start to help you. But take a minute to make sure you're doing everything right, because, you know, if you were to short circuit a battery, it can really surprise you with some sparks. Okay, so once all your wires are installed and you're sure they're installed correctly, you can go ahead and tighten the battery terminal screws using an 8 or 10 millimeter socket and ratchet. They need to be very snug, but you can break these battery terminals by putting too much torque on them. So you need to find the sweet spot where they're not going to come loose, but you're not going to break them in the process. Next, we're going to put the fuse back in. I recommend when you do that you use pliers with rubber handles just to be sure. On some model dollies, when you first put this fuse in, it will create a little spark here, and that's normal. But if the fuse actually blows because there's a short circuit, it's going to be a little bit more dramatic than that spark. Either way, it's best to do it with pliers. Once you've got the fuse completely installed, you can test it, turn the dolly on, you should hear it click, and then you can change gears, make sure it's clicking, give it some power, make sure it's working. Before we close up the dolly, we want to check our wire management. Any wires that could potentially get close to the axle, we want to zip tie, especially right here. We usually zip tie these to this bolt and just double check around that there's no wires hanging that's going to cause a problem. And of course, make sure your batteries are mounted tightly. You want to test and make sure that the dolly will charge, since we messed with the charge port. When we plug this in, this green light should change to orange. Since it's not, that means either there's a problem with the charge port, or it could be that the new batteries are already fully charged. In that case, I would recommend you run them down a little bit and make sure this is working before you close up the dolly and then have to take it all apart again. We hope you found this video helpful. For more information, visit thejollydolly.com/support.